What inspired you to write about the Oregon Trail?
Well, I'm a native Kansan originally, and as one who writes about the American West, I've sort of been through a trail series of 2 books. I did one on the Santa Fe Trail in 2000, and having been born and raised not too far from where the Oregon Trail passed through northeast Kansas, I decided that, that would be something, I need to know more about it, so I'll write a book. Most authors, I think, take the position that, I don't know much about that. I guess I'll write a book and learn about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was going to be my next question. What kind of research did you do for it?
Oh, this is a book where over a period of perhaps 2 decades I had accumulated. I collect books on the American West, nonfiction books, and I had acquired so many different volumes, pamphlets, things containing the recollections and reminiscences of people who went over the Oregon Trail. And so I began to develop that. And then when I started the book, it was about a 3-year project actually writing it. I then had to go through and see what I had and look for other things. So it was a very involved process, as the bibliography and the notes indicate.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Oregon Trail was actually active for a very short time, but you sort of call this an American saga.
Well, it was a short time in the views of some people because they look at the period from about 48 and 49, 50, 51, related to the gold rush in California as a prime time, and it was. A vast number of people traveled it. But some of the people who went to Oregon did so in the very early 1840s. And then people continued to go west, not only to Oregon but to California, following the Oregon Trail until 1869 when the Transcontinental Railroad was finished.
And that sort of short-circuited the whole idea, didn't it?
It did, although some people could not afford the railroad fare, so they went by wagon.
Well, I noticed you had the list in there. You could go first class, or you could go,
yes.
I guess, sitting up all the way, which must have been a horrendous idea.
And it was not as comfortable as some of the buses we see on the highway today.
I'll bet it wasn't. But I appreciated the way you started the book by really giving us a very brief history of Western contact with the whole Oregon area, that we had had people there long before Lewis and Clark. There had been interest in that whole area.
There had been, primarily by ship along the coast, but Lewis and Clark opened it up overland in their 2-year adventure. And then I think it's interesting that as a result of Lewis and Clark, when both of them returned, John Jacob Astor said, well, their report seems to indicate there's lots of fur out there. So he was into fur trading. He decided he would open a major trading post on the Columbia River, which became known as Astoria. And to get there, he sent a ship from New York clear around South America with supplies and men, and he then sent another group overland. And it was these people who went overland that really, they were going to follow Lewis and Clark's path, but they were encouraged to go a little farther south. But they got there after a lot of difficulty. And Astoria then put Americans in the Pacific Northwest before it was U.S. territory.
So that we could argue with the British about who actually owned what.
They argued for a long period of time over that, yes.
I remember very little actually about that period of time except 54, 40, or 5.
Oh, yes, yes, and it's kind of interesting too, because there seems to be a tendency that when the people got to Oregon, they became a little more independent because they were so far from the United States, but they wanted ties, and eventually they got them and became part of the nation.
Well, they actually had a provincial government
Yes,
for a very brief time. It seems to have been organized mostly for the purpose of saying, hey, please make us a state.
Well, there was a mountain man who died, and he left quite an estate in terms of horses and belongings. And it was at that point that the people, in a very small number living in the area around what would be called Portland today, they looked around and they said, you know, how are we going to handle this man's estate? we don't have a government. So they established a government based upon that problem. And that led to the provincial government.
Well, that's very American. We've got
Yes.
a problem, how can we solve it? And they went from there. But I found particularly entertaining a lot of the stories that you had about individuals, both those that are fairly well known in history and a lot of people that most of us have never heard of. Apparently a lot of people kept diaries of their adventure.
Yes, as a matter of fact, in 1849, there are at least 200 diaries and recollections that are known, and there probably are more than that are hidden away. But if you realize over the period of time when the Oregon Trail was very active, from the early 1840s clear up through and into the 60s, you probably have today somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,500, maybe even 3,000 diaries, journals, and recollections, because these people, they felt they were doing something important. They knew they were part of something important as they went 2,000 miles across the United States from the Missouri River on west. And they felt it was important enough to keep track of it, and they put it in paper.
So very briefly, how do you pick and choose from all of that?
That's difficult. I had to cut this by several thousand words, and it was a case where I tried to read it from the reader's perspective. Is this going to be informative? Is this going to be entertaining? Is it going to be interesting? And sometimes one thing would have those three ingredients. It's simply a process of making a decision, realizing that the reader doesn't know what you've cut.
Right.
It's that simple.
Well, that's true. But you indicate in here that there are all these diaries, and then they're just little bits and pieces. I'm assuming if somebody really gets intrigued, a lot of this that
yes.
they can track down themselves.
They can, and in the back will be the citations. And the bibliography has those, and there are Goldfield guides to California and immigrant guides during this period, and they're all listed as well.
Well, I want to thank you so much for talking with us about the Oregon Trail.
Thank you.